what I thought we'd talk today about is the chapter 1 of the Pink Book. And I have, sorry this is not so good, this is the outline of the Pink Book. And just as a recap, in 98, 99, the ICPA published the Red Book. And that was the kind of story was that Don Warren was a retired partner of PwC, by the time he's still PwC, joined the Canadian committee for the idea of creating something on continuous auditing. And then he called me and said, you should join us. And then we convinced the ICPA to join it. You probably don't know this part of the story. And so we participated in this thing, and it came out with the Red Book. Since then, both IIA and ISACA came out with IIA with GTAG number 3, and now GTAG number 16, and ISACA with some guidance, basically 2 documents of guidance. And so we decided to rewrite the Red Book. We called it the Pink Book. And it really didn't become like a rewrite of the Red Book, but became something different. And probably the person who did most work on Pink Book is sitting here next to Alex, Professor Burns here, who has 3 articles in there, correct? 4. Okay, so he did a lot of the work on this. And basically, the first chapter is, you see my name there, and that's Nancy and me that wrote this this kind of rewrite. It was really Michael Alice's idea of rewriting the 91 article with some other stuff. And so that's what we did in here, which I'm going to talk today. And then there has been a study that Paul can give you that basically look what the big 4 the firms are doing in continuous auditing. And in one capsule, what they are doing is the 4 firms are not doing anything in continuous auditing for external audit procedures, but both KPMG and E&Y have kind of consulting for internal audit and do some continuous audit, correct? That's what we found. And then there are actually 2 chapters. One, this is Don Warren. Who else, Paul, in this chapter, the evolution of it? Benita Gilchrist? Yes. Really? I didn't even know that. And can you just tell in 2 words what this chapter does?
Well, basically, it just looks back in time at kind of the formative beginnings of auditing, and then sees how it's evolved over time, and how it's done so largely in response to events leading up to what we kind of hope to be the future.
Okay, and then this is kind of an Imagineering of the Future article. And Trevor did this chapter basically on analytics. And then there is something about the audit data standard. And then Rod and Sati did this chapter on continuous risk monitoring. You also were on that chapter, correct? You wrote it. Yeah. And finally, there are a couple of cases around. And actually, there is no Jim Little case, no Procter & Gamble case. There is a Itaú Unibanco case on the monitoring of branches, and there is a Siemens case, and there is a case from Iceland on Verizon. So those are the 3 cases, correct? Or I'm forgetting any.
So what was did you mention Itaú?
There is Itaú branch monitoring. There is the Siemens case, and then there is the Verizon case from Iceland. Yeah, I think those are the 3 cases. So there are 3 cases. The Pink Book supposedly is ready and is now basically being edited, and it's going to come out pretty soon, maybe 3-4 months, correct? And I don't think the cover will be pink.
And will they be, these most recent articles, are they going to not release those separately? They're just going
Yeah, no, this is good. Paul is getting double dips here because he was published in the website of the AICPA as an independent document, and now he's going to be part of the book. So you can put 2 lines in your resume for each of your 4 chapters. So Paul has already 8 items in his resume. See? And I had forgotten that you were on this too, Denise. Yeah, I had forgotten that. And Steve. Oh, no, Denise and Abdullah, correct? Who? On the Don Warren chapter. Was Denise and Abdullah, yeah. You said Denise before.
No,
Benita, oh, okay. Okay. So the good thing about the Pink Book is that a lot of authorships, meaning Paul can put his name in many, many different things. Okay. Okay, so I just put up here the definition that we had in the past of continuous auditing. Continuous audit is a methodology that enables independent auditors to provide written assurance on a subject matter for which an entity management is responsible using a serious auditor's report issued virtually simultaneously. And this is a big discussion item that we, in several of our articles, had of what really this is. And the 4th Continuous Audit Symposium at Texas A&M was totally dedicated at arguing of this definition. Remember that, Alex? Big waste of time arguing about the definition. Now, let me, before we go ahead and talk a little bit about what I have in the slides, let me ask you, what's the difference between a continuous auditing idealized in when we did the CPAS project for 86 to 90 and the continuous audit today? Yeah. Yeah, that's actually Steve's chapters, Steve's pictures are the out of his how his ecosystem are basically the concluding of this thing. June. Yeah, I think what I usually would say on this is basically what we now know that. What are you doing? We now know that we can reasonably automate a lot of parts of the audit. It's basically an overlay on top of ERP and the other parts that go in. And we know that there are some analytics that we could run on a continuous basis or pretty close to continuous basis. We also know that no one is really doing it. So that's the things that we know. And we also know that auditors are farther and farther from the data. There are more layers of software and process between the auditor and the data, and that eventually will need to have a large level of filtering and exceptioning in order to pick up things for the auditor to revise. And Hussein is not here, but you'll need to do a lot of exceptional exceptions to deal with what the auditors are going to review or not. So that's, I think, a priori is the thoughts. And what we actually did on this thing, we went over and kind of thought a bit about practice, thought a little bit about what was in the 91 article, and kind of restructure it for the current. Alex, can I now use it? Okay. Okay, and so this is the other discussion that now in the recent conference we always had, is what's the difference between continuous audit and continuous monitoring? And what is the difference? Paul says there is no difference. Yeah, I usually say that continuous monitoring is a layer below an assurance layer. And without doing the monitoring, you can do the auditing. But actually what Jim Littley said, and Littley and Costello here, is that auditing is done by auditors, monitoring is done by managers. Okay, but you know what, the Prometheus and the at AT&T basically many of the things were joined, and then there were some kind of separate things. The operation guys wanted things like job sequencing and do fixes in certain things, and the auditors didn't care for that, but the auditors wanted to have some analytical procedures that give them some assurances of certain things happening. Yeah. Yeah, what I tend to say about this, and Trevor sometimes doesn't like when I say this, is I tend to say that some of these concepts, like 3 lines of defense, independence, materiality, which we argued a lot in what was chapter 3, I finally gave in. Those concepts are going to have to be retaught, because there is these are kind of the golden rules of auditing, and doesn't make a lot of sense to think in the same threshold of, let's say, materiality of allowable error when you have a totally automated system than if you're doing manual reviews. And the independence issue is an interesting issue here. Is need to be some rethinking on how to deal with this. I toned down a lot of my discussion of this, because every time you talk to an auditor like Nancy and you mention that independence has to be conceptualized, she's ready to kill you. and so, but it is, because, at this moment, for example, the client pays the auditor. That's impairment of independence, correct? Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually think that this idea, the monitoring is going to be happening. I mean, you see that the ERPs have monitoring components on it. And the whole idea of the 3 lines of defense, the auditor will have to be involved to a certain degree, monitoring the monitoring, correct? To a certain degree. And so there is some need of thinking to be done that. I actually think, this is aggressive here, but I actually think that the auditor opinion should be something like, I have been monitoring the system and I haven't seen something very big that bothers me. I think that would be a very interesting product to give out. But, this is a product very much in the boundaries of consulting. And I think, Sarbanes-Oxley forbidding consulting sounded like a great idea, correct? Meaning, they get corrupted by this and the money, etc. In reality, what it made is auditors less intimate with the system structures that they have, because, then they couldn't charge to do some of that really understanding of the system. So it created a much less attached external auditor. And I think it would be much more desirable that the auditor had some products that would entail understanding carefully the system. Because the other thing that you said here is, I expect the audit of the future to be not financial, to be a whole mix using the different pieces of the ERP or different pieces of big data. And that's difficult to do under the current rules, correct? The auditors, this is actually Phil says this. Don't tell him I quoted him. But he says, you go into an audit, you have this amount of fees, okay? You have to do all these kind of procedural things that the PCAOB wants you to do. By the time you're done with that thing, he didn't do these words, but that's what he meant. I'm sure you were there when he did it. And by the time you're done with that, you don't have a lot of resources to do the real analytics that you need to know to understand. I mean, what is the advantage of pulling 70 samples out of a 10 million number of records, correct? Which the PCAOB demands. And so it finishes up that you have a certain amount of dollars. You either do the thing that pro forma needs to be done, but is not very useful to understand the system, to understand the reliability of the system, or you do the analytics. You can't do the both because there's not enough money there. And so there's something that will have to be resolved eventually, and I think the best way to resolve this is create a monitoring type of opinion and a more traditional type of opinion, but maybe given more frequently, like a seal or something like that. And we put that in the red book. And actually, the attachment of the book written by someone in the CICA, had this kind of evergreen opinion idea. And that hasn't come out, but eventually it will, I think. No, the subject matter is not going to. And, you know, just something that struck me, what is it, 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, Siripan, myself, and I don't think anyone else is here that did that survey. We went to like 9 large companies, and we looked at what they were doing internally. And that, Yeah, that we had Jim Littley helped us to put together the 4 steps and etc., which we finish up disagreeing on, but he helped us kind of the maturity model. He finished up creating a 5-step maturity. But the thing that struck me is when we interviewed the firms for Pink Book, remember chapter 2, correct, of Pink Book, is how less the public accounting firms are doing than the internal audit departments. And we thought the internal audit department are not doing very much. But they were at stage 2, 2.5, and the firms were not doing really very much. And so obviously, this I think effect of Sarbanes. The effect of Sarbanes is that made the audit, external audit less deep, just to say this. So, and this will have to change. The question is how is this going to happen? And now this is the other thing. You know, you guys you have seen, I'm sorry, I have to go back. This thing has a delay and is misleading. Okay, you have seen this. And usually, just repeating this because a couple of you haven't heard it, when we did the CPAS project at AT&T, we did continuous audit project. And basically it was monitoring 40 places of data at the Arkham biller and developing models to compare against that data. And when exceptions happened, we did something with it. Okay. And then Rod Brennan called us in 2002, 2003, and started talking about we have 250 instances of SAP. We only audit them every 2 years. What do we do about this? And then at the time, Mike, Alex, myself, and a couple of other people worked on this idea of picking up a profile of the controls and the parameterization and compare it. And then Ryan, actually, in his dissertation, continued the work by looking at the things that couldn't be directly automated. Was Vasu actually who did the first prototype for monitoring the control structures, monitoring the control parameters, the configurable controls. And we got, I think the result at that time was 25% of the controls in the audit action sheets were actually deterministic and monitorable. And then Ryan went over to St. Louis in one of the subsidiaries of Siemens, and we did, while they were auditing with the audit action sheets, Ryan was trying to automate these things. And he came out with a 63% number, which 63% of the actions could be automated. And our next idea was to go to KPMG and say, now, what do we do with the 37% that are not automatable? Do you really need it now that you're monitoring controls every day? That was the idea. But KPMG got fired from that engagement because of the scandal on Siemens and external payments. And E&Y went in, but we don't have the contacts at E&Y that we had at KPMG. So third part of project basically never was done. The other thing is Rod, this also don't repeat a lot of these comments. Rod got expelled from internal audit because he doesn't get along with this guy from PwC that came to be the very traditional auditor. This is the head of internal audit now at Siemens. So Rod is now chief risk officer. And so we couldn't continue the work. But the third stage would have been very interesting because there are audit actions say, check if there is documentation of X, Y, Z. A lot of kind of soft stuff. And so we would have been very interested to see, can we redo this? And one interesting comment, audit action sheets in average have 10 audit actions. And they were written at Siemens with the purpose of having SAP experts being able to conduct audits. So they are very specific what needs to be done in an audit framework. And you might not know this, KPMG basically designed those things. KPMG International, at the time that was allowable to be done. And so KPMG designed these things. So if you think there are about maybe 3,000 actions, 300 action sheets multiplied by 10 actions. Okay, and one of the things we found out is many of them were not really necessary. So actually, before Rod left, he redid the action sheets to 187 action sheets, simplified it dramatically. And he says, many of you know him, he says that they could have been simplified even more. But that thing was this kind of methodology of, we called CCM at that time, and Michael, Alex, and myself published a paper on this with Rod. And since then, both ACL and Caseware came out with products that were of this type. Okay, and more recently, we have been talking about the CRNA methodology. That's where Moon started, but I think Moon now is moving into other places, correct? And we still want to do this risk monitoring assessment. Everywhere you talk about this, people are interested on monitoring risk. We just haven't had a good project to do that. I think Sati at CA is quite interested on working with someone on this. Correct, Moon? But it's not going to be Moon, so it's going to be someone else. Okay, but we'll do something on this area. And this thing emerged from Shrikant. And Shrikant is a guy in India, and he used to be head of compliance for Citibank in Far East. Shrikant Espanti, he's a practitioner. And Shrikant says, you know, most of the things that I monitored at Citibank are automatable. And in that study that we did with Siripan, looking at the internal audit department, we came out with this concept of audit-like organizations. We call them ALOs. And basically what we found out is that most companies will have internal audit, might have internal control, might have Sarbanes-Oxley, might have Basel, has fraud. And there was one of the organizations we examined the survey had 7 things we thought were audit-like. FCPA, yes. Separate organization for FCPA. And we also discovered that these audit-like organizations have very different levels of technology. Meaning we work at Itaú and they have about 350 people in internal audit, about 500 in internal control. But the internal audit guys are doing continuous auditings and they are doing technology stuff. The control guys are all manual, all procedure. And they overlap big time. And they don't get along either. Which is normal. You know, you're competing in functions is normal. And then we discovered, and I think, Michael, what's the name of the guy in Texas that's not there anymore that did all that work on, it's your friend in Texas in auditing that did the work in internal audit organization. Huh? Urton Anderson, yeah. Urton Anderson kind of called our attention that the King report in South Africa had this kind of coordinated audit idea. And I actually think that's going to be a big thing, the coordinated audit, trying to resolve the inefficiencies of these audit-like organizations. And I think we could create this layer of compliance monitoring on the things that are automatable. I did try to convince a company to do a project with us on this, but I didn't get too far with it. But I will go and convince someone else to do that. Okay, you want to talk a little bit about this, Nancy?
Sure. So, as Miklos and I were talking about, you know, where is continuous audit, right? It kind of started when he showed the traditional definition. It was about assurance, simultaneous behavior of transactions, and it's by an auditor solution. But if we start thinking about the preponderance of data, right, all these sophisticated ERP systems, all the different interests in companies, right, reporting, there's a lot of different users, right? There's a lot of people that might be interested for different reasons. So we just started talking about who would use it, right? Management, auditors, regulators, investors, how would they use it? put together this chart, and every time I look at it, I think I can make changes. So if you see something you don't agree
She's
with,
becoming an academic. Can never.
never final. So, you know, if you think about what you can do, you can provide assurance on data. So data, that term was selected intentionally. It could be financial, it could be non-financial, right? Social media, whatever. So some sort of data assurance. I think this is controls. Can't remember.
Yes, it is controls.
And then this one is compliance. So it could be regulatory compliance.
Yeah, can you move it?
Contractual compliance, union related, right? You know, there's lots of different types of
Mouse, yeah.
risk monitoring, right? So this could be any sort of degrees of risk. And I don't know how familiar this group is with COSO, so the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. Yeah, I'm getting some this nods and this nods both. So for public companies that have to get an integrated audit where they get an audit of their internal control over financial reporting, they have to have a framework that they're applying it to. So COSO has put out a framework, and the big part of that was updated in 2013. Has to do with risk monitoring and risk assessment. So that's kind of taking on a life of its own. And then also just operationally, right? So there's a lot of different things. So, you know, investors are probably primarily related in data assurance. So do they want to invest? Are they happy to stay invested? How are they going to make their decisions? What's that?
He's moving the join me thing there. He's destroying your slide, that's all.
I'm going to quit referring to it. So you can have diagnostic things, right? It could be historical, which is what external auditors typically do. Predictive, right? This morning, Miklos and I were talking, and we were talking about preventative, right? So this is about having some sort of continuous monitoring or auditing happen before the transaction occurs. So it's doing checks before it happens, so preventative, right? There's a lot of different uses. All of these things could be automated, but in many cases where there's an exception, there will need to be some sort of manual intervention. So somebody will need to get involved and make a judgment, right? Maybe they're using it to make a decision, but in many cases you'll still need to have some level of manual intervention beyond just creating the multi-ledger algorithms that you might use. So that's
You know, they managed to destroy our table here, fiddling with the graph.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, but you,
so that's really what. Anything to add to that?
no, but we'll continue. Not to add for this moment. Okay, so this was actually the CPAS project, and this is a summarization of it. And just for you to see, there were 4 large data centers. And we decided not to go into the systems, but the system reports, electronic reports were sent, and we actually screen scraped the reports, you text mine the data out of the reports, put in database, and then we presented everything in the form of graphs. And this was the CPAS system, but you have to understand this was done from 86 to 90. So before the web existed. Okay, but it was hypertext too, and et cetera, et cetera. So the conceptualization at that time came out of this work. Now, actually we'll move ahead on this one because I already talked about this. Now, on the original paper, when we conceptualized, we had basically 4 concepts that we used. This concept of metric, and what is a metric is a measurement out of the system. It's a direct measure of the system. So you would pull it out of ERP or of a monitoring control layer. And then this concept of standard, which is you compare a metric with a standard. And typically you would use 2 types of standards. One standard, what the value should be, and the second standard is what is an acceptable variance. Okay, so let's suppose that let's say that the bill completion rates when the system was designed, they're supposed to be 98%. So the standard is 98%. Now, the standard of variance would be, let's say, 10%. Therefore, if the bill completion rate go before 98 minus 10, 88, it goes 87, then you would have a serious alarm. So you define always a standard of variance and a standard of standard measurement. And so that concept actually doesn't come from CPAS, comes from engineering, and they do it in paper pulp management and things like that. But it's a very simple concept. Concept utilize where you have a standard, you have an actual, compare the two of them. If they are very different, you have an alert. So that was the concept we have. And then we talked about the other concept was analytics, and the concept was reasonably created at the time, types of measurements that you would do linking more than one metric. But it turned out that what we did was a lot of graphic stuff, a lot. The guy who was working on the metrics was a guy called Kazuo Ezawa. He had the PhD from Stanford in industrial engineering, and he did all his analytics in his little Macintosh. He picked up data manually, put it in the Macintosh, calculated, made these analytics, and then we wrote Unix code to basically implement these things. But interesting enough, we called it analytics because we thought it would be equations, etc. A large part of it were actually graphics. And now, of course, with the kind of graphics we have, we would do much more. However, today, our ability of doing analytics became much better. And, we have developed ideas like continuity equations, clustering, and etc. that we can use as analytics. Just call your attention. I don't know how the ICPA is going to do this, but I tended to highlight in yellow what are the additions to the 91 paper, or additions to what we did there. So the conceptualization were these things here. However, in the analytics, we can add continuity equation, clustering, and etc. Now, we had this kind of 4 levels of alarm. I don't think we had a conceptual basis for that. We just made that up. And the first level of alarm was something that just didn't look right and went to the people that maintained the system, like a variable disappeared from AT&T or whatever. Then the second concept was something that bothered us a little bit, and so went just to the auditors that are monitoring the system. The third level was important alarm that management also should be called the attention. And remember, this is kind of conceptually a little bit challenging here, because from one second to the other, auditors and management are acting as a line of defense. So this is something that eventually needs to be reconciled with what the current theory is on 3 lines of defense. And finally, the fourth level that we called was a catastrophic error was happening, stop the system before things got worse. And that did happen once. We had the example of bill completion rates, and the standard was 98%. And in a weekend, we started noticing completion rates of 20%. Went from 90 to 60 to 50 to 20. And so we actually stopped the system. We had that power. And we discovered much later that an operator had double-mounted tapes with transactions, and then he had some programming experience and realized he'd done that. He multiplied every field by -1 and mounted it again. And so negative account numbers was a catastrophe happening. Then I come back to work on Monday morning. They had closed our data streams. The people at operation got so angry, so pissed at us, because we stopped the operation, and they got very, very angry and closed the operations. The reason why I was working on this is because I was acquaintance or friend of the CFO of AT&T that was a partner of Coopers & Lybrand's that have a divestiture moved over to AT&T. So I called Bob Kavner up and asked him, can you talk to them? And so he made a call, and our data was reinstated. And I got a call from this guy who had stopped our data. And we had a meeting, and it was a very unpleasant meeting, very honestly. We 4 of us went there, and he yelled at us a lot. But we left that day with $1 million contract. And that was the Prometheus project, where they wanted a system like CPAS to monitor the system. And it took me a few weeks to convince internal auditing that that was okay, because they were totally sold now on the concept of continuous audit, and they were getting this data, and they were very happy with it. And the idea that the enemy, meaning the monitoree, would have the same reports was not very good for them. I actually telling you, I never sold a project in one day, except that day, okay, in all these years of working on this thing. And so we kind of finally convinced Bruce Barr, who was the head of internal audit, that was okay, but we kept a whole set of reports secret. So we gave common platform and some reports for auditing, some reports for management, and some common reports. And I don't know if Alex was already here, and Michael, when the IBM guys came here and started talking about their monitoring and control and auditing systems, they subcontracted them, they developed them, and then they gave it to the client. And they were just kept some of the reports. It took about 3 years for IBM to get the clients to take them over. But that actually did happen. Okay. Now, so these were the levels of alarm. Now, this was actually very interesting, this story here. AT&T was spent over $1 billion in their biller. And that was a management thing. It's called take-back strategy. What happened is AT&T in '84 was split up, stayed with long distance, and 7 operating companies was created, Verizon, SBC, et cetera, and with the companies went the switches, 142 switches distributed around the United States. And if the switch went with them, you didn't have access to the client data. So actually who was billing was Verizon, SBC. So you got one bill integrated, AT&T and SBC. No contact with the client. So big strategy thing at that time for AT&T was creating a national biller. And for the client it was bummer, because we started getting 2 bills instead of 1. Not different prices, but was a bummer. But for AT&T it was big strategy type of thing. So they were spending, this was the biggest project they have there. And when I did, this started because I joined Bell Labs, and Kavner told me, go and talk to the internal auditor guys, they need help. So I came out with 3 recommendations. One recommendation was get some computers here. Okay, there are 300 auditors and no computers. Okay, the second one was just kind of a recommendation on how they were organized. And the third one was say you have these huge systems and no one understands all of it. You understand pieces of it. This is a big liability. And the first one, they say, forget it, we'll take care of it. And they actually they owned a PC company, and in 2 weeks they had 300 computers in there. They really worked on it. Because it came from Kavner's endorsement. Kavner, the big CFO. And the third one said, I don't know what you guys want to talk about the system, but I understand the problem. You should work on it. That's how the CPAS project started. And I said, okay, give us a small system, and we'll develop a methodology of monitoring and auditing a system. But they wanted to do this thing. And so what can you do? The client tell you what he wants to do. But the first thing I found out that there were maybe 5,000 change requests in line. So we would be 5,001. So the last thing we wanted is being in that stream of system development. Terrible, would take forever. So what we actually did, we had to think about a methodology that we could get the data without asking changes in the system. And the way we came out was this thing we called measurement versus monitoring. Monitoring would be going to databases, extracting the data. What we did is we picked up copies of electronic reports that they were distributing across the country in a thing that at that time was called RGE, remote job entry. And this was basically a copy of electronic copy of a report sent, let's say, here to Homedale, and they printed it out and distributed to the people that use it. So we got it electronic. We hopped it over to the mail system of Bell Labs and sent it to my Sun workstation. That's what we did. And the first day we did that, we crashed the entire mail system of Bell Labs. And we are sending huge amounts of data. 5 megs in the morning, 8 megs in the evening. And it crashed everything. Any other organization would have basically forbidden me to use the systems. That was Bell Labs. The guy in the interface in Homedale says, I'll fix it. And then gave me this huge lecture, why are you using mail? You should be using UUCP, Unix to Unix Communication Protocol. So I got a lecture, and in 2 days he had the thing resolved. Okay, he was good. Huh? Copy? No. Oh, Unix to Unix Communication Protocol. You want to put a bet? In rubles? Okay. So we changed it to UCP, and the thing was great. And it worked out, et cetera, et cetera. When we close the project, meaning at Bell Labs, so you close the project and you do a post-mortem. And close the product, meaning we pass it to billing, they were running it, and pass to the operation guy. Unix to Unix copy. He is right. I owe him rubles. Okay, and so and what they did at labs, they bring physical scientists from different areas to review what you did. And they slam me for this. For why didn't you go to the databases? This is the way to do it, this and that and that. By the time I retired from AT&T 2 years ago, they had over 50 projects working with overlay extraction because you don't interfere with the systems. So it wasn't such a bad idea, but I got slammed big time. I was already moving to Rutgers, so I didn't care. But obviously you have direct data access is more interesting. But if in the many projects we kind of seen people doing in different companies, no one likes to let auditors having unfettered access to data. Really, they don't like it. Think that auditors are going to destroy the system. And they might, correct? Yeah, they don't accept it. So actually, now, we actually think that the extension, these were the 5 concepts, 4 of them, plus this data extraction thing. We actually think that risk compliance, monitoring of controls like CCM, and improved data analytics are really going to change a little bit what we are doing in the direction of what Steve's ecosystem prescribes. Okay, now this is another table on the 91 paper. And what this table talked is about technologies. And remember, you don't even believe this existed because you're not, a couple of you are not even born at that time. 90, okay, 90. Were you born? you were born in 90? 99?
1990.
Yeah, so yeah, that was the year you were born, okay? But at that time, there was no web. There was internet. People think internet was invented by our vice president in 92. No. The internet existed since the 70s. Huh? IPv4, but...
Otherwise, 1969.
Okay. But what actually the technologies change, and that the major 3 changes that we think that are going to be progressively incorporated in audit system is very distributed cloud-based systems, large expansion of the data frames, and finally some semi-intelligent functions on the network and on the auditing environment. And for that, we are going to start kind of thinking differently of how to perform auditing. And for example, I'll tell you one thing that immediately is a major issue, is what is the role of the auditor in thinking about data security in a distributed cloud-based system? Remember, the standards still tell you that you go there and see if there is physical facility protection. There is a guard in the door, there is a sign-in to go into the data center, etc. And how do you examine a distributed cloud with 5, 6 huge warehouses in different places in the world, and they are going to go see if they have guards in the doors? They're going to see who logs in. It's very difficult. We need to rethink. And when in ASAC, when we have these meetings, people still talk about those guidelines and etc. Which is kind of strange.
But you have one of these services organizations reports, right?
Yeah, and that's what actually ASAC is starting to come up. Is come up with.
It was 70.
Yeah. Yeah, where's size 70? Yeah. But that's kind of a challenge for auditing. And of course, we have written enough about big data recently that we kind of understand that there are challenges in the big data area. And I started thinking about what kind of semi-intelligent applications you can put in the periphery of these applications to replace some of the auditor functions. I just going to have to share something with you. Every time I talk about this in class, about automating and putting some intelligent functions, students look very sad.
Well, they should.
Why?
It will put them out of work.
Yeah, that's the reaction. Oh, there's not going to be a job for me. Yeah, that's what I always say.
The most capable ones.
Yeah, that's what I always say. I say the distance between the auditor and his data is getting bigger and bigger. There is more layers of software sitting over there. And instead of auditing 1 gig of data, they are going to be involved in auditing gigas of data. Okay? And so there is going to be plenty of assurance to be done, not only financial, but process assurance and et cetera, et cetera. That's a good thing, so they look a little bit happier. But what I don't say is what Alex just said, for the most competent of them. Correct? Because the skill set necessary for this is changing dramatically. Right. Denise, what were we saying yesterday?
Well, look at a modern auditor versus a traditional auditor. And we're looking at it by exception versus audit by sample. So you have a lot of students who are graduating who pass the exam and who love a course or two, get their CPA certification, but they're not prepared for the real corporate world. Big data and all enterprise systems.
And Helen, I don't know if you ever heard me saying this. I always say this, is when you go to the students and show them, let's say, continuous auditing, you say, is this in the CPA exam? You say, no, they're just not interested. Okay? Then you go to the AICPA and say, you should be asking audit analytics, you should be asking more IT, and etc. They say, your student don't know it. So we are in a major double bind here. And it's very difficult to get out of this.
Start preparing the students as of now, who will be taking the exam 3 years later, different.
I think that's going to be the demand side. I think the firms, I don't know how this works, but they should go to the AICPA and say, look, we're not getting the CPAs coming out of school that have the requirements and the skills we need. They're not equipped with modern day.
Oh, but the firms are saying that. I heard this over and over.
Maybe the AICPA and the CPA exam will change, but right now.
The problem is resources here, right? Because because you have one auditing class. So at minimum, we have to prepare our students to pass the CPA exam as it is today, not how it's going to be. Right? So we have to prepare them. But we would benefit by having more classes or another audit class.
And you know what Dan would say to that? We don't have any place to put one more class.
And that's what I was saying, that resource.
Well, you have like two, I mean, you have all these classes where you're doing manual accounting. I mean, so that needs to change. The theory and then add in some more coursework and using software. I mean, because all this is automated in the business world. And why are they taking 3 or 4 courses, 2 years worth of manual classes?
But you know what? The other thing you guys are being very gentle and not mentioning is, do we have the competency with the traditional accounting faculty to teach this thing? Or meaning, maybe we do have, and I think Michigan, what is not Northern Michigan, will have it next with Professor Burns there. But you know what? We start putting advanced analytics and etc. You think accounting faculty can teach it? No. You guys know the audit faculties.
But that's the schools kicking and screaming.
No, yeah, the market, that's what.
Because if you have PhDs coming out and you have, people saying, look, we see this, when there's more and more focus and emphasis on capital markets or, archival research, so you have a lot of people shying away from doing audit research, and now you're talking systems research, trying to come into an accounting department. So, I mean, I think that the whole paradigm has to change, because schools are not going to do it unless there's a push from the profession and from, quite frankly, see the exam. If you expand what the requirements are to pass the exam or to qualify to take the exam, then schools have no other choice, because then you're not preparing your students for the minimum passing.
But I think what allows this extra coursework to be embedded is the 150 credit requirement for undergrads.
Right, but that's so wide.
The standard
right.
accounting degree is what, 126 or something? So you get an extra 24 credits, like 8 classes.
Yeah,
well,
but
that's where you bring in some of this more.
Right, but a lot of schools don't put that kind of requirement.
Right.
Students can take basket week.
No, you're right. We need the CPA exam to change first,
Right,
and then the model will follow the changing.
But you guys are going to affect this a lot. I got an email today from Deirdre. Do you remember her in the PhD program here? She was as accounting as you can think, traditional accounting. You know what she's doing today? She's doing a study on the history with Paul Miranti of continuous auditing. And many of her ex-PhD students, Fatima was market study. What is she doing? AIS research. And several of them are teaching AIS. They will look at you and say, oh, you came from Rutgers, you have to teach AIS. No one wants to teach AIS, correct?
Well, I can tell you just, from a practitioner point of view, the PCAOB, when they were inspecting firms, initially a lot of their comments were about accounting and reporting. Now most of the comments are about auditing internal control, IT and audit, right? So that it's moving. And even the national offices of most of the big firms are really increasing the resources on the audit side versus the accounting side. So there's changes happening.
Yeah, I think the changes are happening. I was at the PCOB the day before yesterday doing a lecture to the inspectors, which was very interesting. I can't talk with the standard setters, or they are not interested in continuous auditing, but inspectors are. Yeah. And they ask a lot of questions. They have a group of like 60 IT auditors there. And they actually don't do any IT audit. They review the IT audits that the firms do. Not all, but good part of it. And the guy who heads this is a guy called Bill Powers that was at Coopers & Lybrand with Stan Halper and Bob Kavner. You probably know him. He's one of us old guys in the field. Yeah, you probably know him, Bill Powers. And he's actually going to come and visit here, so you guys are going to meet him. You can drill him with as many questions about the PCOB as you want. He has been there nearly 15 years, since it started, pretty much, building an IT audit. But it's very interesting. It is never seen an IT audit group that doesn't do IT audits. They review IT audits. Okay, ask them what kind of software they have. Yeah, not too much. Okay, but it seemed to be a pretty competent group. It was interesting, very interested in control monitoring. Very.
I think the mindset has to change, right? Because it's auditing, and IT, it's not just IT, it's auditing.
Yeah, when I started teaching IT audit, I just had joined USC. It was my first course. And I would say at that time, 5 years, there'll be no traditional auditors because every system has computers, so everyone will be IT auditor. How many years have passed? 40 years, and they still same kind of thing. You know that is about 10% of auditors in organization. That's what we calculated with CVPAN. 10, 12% that IT audit. Same thing in the firms, correct? Of the auditors is a small number. And I actually kind of wonder when is this going to change, if it's ever going to change. Now, if Pei and June have their way here and audit data standard and apps, everyone will be doing IT audits without being an IT audit.
But I think, the qualifications change. You know, I think 30 years ago, if you understood personal computers and you were an auditor, you were an IT auditor, right? Now, these days, those IT auditors, they have to understand the intrinsic components of ERP systems, so everybody uses computers. I mean,
Everyone uses a laptop, correct?
yeah, well, but not beyond that.
And there's Excel.
No, ACL and ID, I mean, become pretty much basic.
No. When CVPAN and me visited Johnson & Johnson, Hewlett Packard, and etc., they have a specialist to use ACL. A couple of the companies actually trained everyone. Yeah.
But the basic interface, I mean, just interrogating customer details.
You know this company
doesn't everybody?
No. Home Depot, 80% of the auditors rotate in 18 months.
But isn't it? Yeah, it's a basic qualification, right? So it's not just it proliferated. So those things.
Idea is for sure.
At KPMG, yes, idea is.
So it became much higher level. These days, if you are an IT auditor, you have to understand networking, you have to understand instruction plan service systems.
So you think we're already where I thought that everyone would be an IT auditor?
Is it more about, getting the right skills at the right time? So if you think about an audit today, right, you've got valuation issues, so you get specialists involved with that, you have actuaries involved with pension things, so that, the core team will need to have an understanding of it, but they'll interface with some specialists involved at the right time. So it's probably a mix of those things, right? So the core team having a better understanding as well as getting the right people.
To know who to ask.
Yeah, several of the firms do have kind of this deep specialist pool, which they bring in for.
It's inevitable because nobody can know everything. You cannot say, I mean, if it's generalist, you cannot.
It's not unlike medicine. You go and see your primary care physician, checks you out, and if there's anything at all the issue, then you'll go off and see a specialist. I mean, the knowledge is so broad. I mean, you need evaluation, pension, you get all this stuff, and that's a very different skill set than knowing how to do ACL. So you tend more towards specialization because the scope is so broad. And then you have the other thing, of course, is that people want to go into accounting. You want to be whiz-bang accountants or auditors. Like KPMG auditors. This is rock stars.
Yeah, but I think it's a consequence of the knowledge pools being deep now, and people it's like you PhD students. I always say you have to be the best in a very narrow domain, very deep, and you have to know more than your advisor, or you are not inventing new contributions. Correct?
One of the ways I see this involved is the audit itself is sort of formulated so that it gets broken down into its kind of component parts. So what you have is somebody who's interfacing with compliance, who's kind of the lead auditor, has to know a bit about everything. But anything that's more complex can get shipped off to somebody else, and because you've got cloud computing, you've got all these issues with this. But you have teams all over the place. You can actually do specialist things. So you've got a specialist in statistical application, and advice of, well, somebody could be sitting in Amsterdam and could answer all the questions there, and that can be tapped into by people all over the world. And similarly with audits.
So the engagement partner is basically the general contractor.
Yeah, and then one guy does the tiles, the other guy does the pool.
One of the examples, all the firms do journal entry testing. So I know White has a specialist team in Hyderabad, and that's what they did. They did journal entry testing. So if you've got journal entry testing, those are the guys who do it. And they do it 55 times a day. They can do it very, very efficiently, very well.
There's groups that handle confirmation, there's groups that handle kind of the routine before the judgment.
So there is a paper to be written here about what modules are the modules. Let me just turn this off. Sorry about that. What?
It's kind of reconstruction of orders. So, I mean, if you think of it in the past, I mean, orders had to be kind of vertically integrated. So you have to send a team, and soup to nuts, they'd have to know everything that was going on at the time to be able to do everything. You didn't have any options. Now you can actually deconstruct those tasks and split them out over the internet and through the cloud to wherever they can be done most effectively.
So is there an implication of that in audit theory? Is there an implication of what should be in the CPA exam? What are the implications here?
I think you struggle to initially get anything within the generalist. So you got to know all about everything, and you're not going to be very deep in anything. And once you get to a firm,
So maybe the CPA exam is okay. Maybe the CPA exam is okay.
No, it's like
well, but I mean, it's like the advanced analytics stuff that you want to have with practice. I mean, that's something that you can post CPA. If that's an area that you want to specialize in, firm will want to specialize in, and they'll send you off and you'll stick to that for.
it's like in medicine. I mean, you have to take the board, right? It doesn't matter what your specialty is going to be. Everybody takes the same board. So you pass the board, you get a license. Now, after that, if you want to specialize, there are specialty boards.
I think it's emphasizing the importance of critical thinking, right? Regardless of whether you're the generalist. I think that critical thinking.
I think one of the things that something I always hear about a lot is that people struggle to think systems terms. They don't really
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
systems all that.
He's not sitting down anymore.
This is, guys, this is Kerry, just accepted a job at Rutgers. Your next professor. So we have a Korean invasion, with Professor No last year and Kerry here this year, and Yoon.
Their names are very similar.
So you saw her presenting paper, most of you, correct? Okay. So let's move ahead here. Now this is going to get more controversial, okay? If it's not enough, okay? Some things to be considered in this new audit. There are no reasonable limits of sources of data, but there are great limits on what data an organization can actually store and make useful. You agree with this?
Useful, possibly, but store. I'm not sure the limits of that
You can't store the entire big data environment.
Why not? You can.
No, you cannot.
Well, to a certain extent.
No, every environment basically throws away most of the data they
don't
pull.
use them, but they can store them. This is the thing.
They can, but they can't because there is not enough storage.
It's not that. I think that they don't see the benefit. This is my guess. I mean, this is why they don't try. If Google, why does Google keep them? Because Google does use them.
But why is it an axiom? I mean, don't organizations store whatever they're going to use to make use of? So,
It's not an axiom. You can say that this is an assumption. You can make an assumption, but the fact of the matter is that
So he's got names listed and he's putting ticks next. That's not what he's doing.
okay, that's the
I
first
don't
axiom.
know what he's doing.
So that's your first axiom. Shut up. What's the next one?
That's the next one. In general, data tend to exist to support particular decisions or processes, but the greater challenge is to anticipate such needs and create software and process for its examination. That's what we're talking at breakfast. Meaning, my classic example, many of you heard, is the Malaysian airliner that disappeared. Okay, they had 6 different data strings being sent in different places. How is it possible that they don't know where the plane is? Professor Kogan is going to say NSA knows where the plane is, but they are not telling you.
No, I don't think so. No, but you see, that was always the challenge, because if you look at the early enterprise systems, and say with hierarchical databases, you really had to structure it according to the certain set of reports that you had to anticipate in advance. So that we need to generate these reports, and we are going to structure the data so that these reports are easy to generate. Okay, so the whole point of relational databases was that, you know what, we cannot know in advance what kind of reports we're going to need in the future. So we have to divorce the storage structure from the reporting needs, make it universal enough so that we can support whatever we want, which is, again, I mean, it's a tall order, and when they claimed that they did it, it was somewhat of an exaggeration, because, you know, you have to get into the details to see what kind of relationship, how. But the ambition was the same. So here, the story is the same. You cannot anticipate future needs. So just recognize it. So don't even try to do that. Try to store as much as you can. Don't worry what those future needs are.
Okay, so you have RFID inventory. You guys heard me talk about this example. Okay, you can collect, RFID is collectible as many times as you want, correct? So are you going to collect it once a day, once a year, or once a millisecond?
Well, I mean, first of all, that again, it is an exaggeration to claim that it is collectible every millisecond. It's not. Now, the systems,
Every tenth of a second it is.
No. The systems, at least if you look at the enterprise systems, they are designed to accept it at a certain frequency, and those frequencies are not in seconds; they are actually in minutes. And for all the practical purposes, it is good enough, right? So you are not really tracking a fugitive from justice who is going to cut the bracelet, or you're tracking stuff.
But if you want to use RFID to track inventory movement, not just storage of inventory, you need to collect information pretty fast.
That would mean a little bit more than RFID. Why don't just put GPS chip?
Yeah, you do RFID and GPS. Yeah.
Depending on how valuable this common.
But usually, you know, there are very rare cases where people actually track something when it is moving. So you are really tracking it in your different locations.
Well, you track airplanes when they're moving.
Specialized example. But say if you're looking at, say, regular enterprises who warehouse stuff, right, somewhere. So if you have the readers in those locations, and the readers can tell you what is where.
And I think at that point, like you have like art, when they transfer art or something like that, they do add those GPS tracks.
Yeah, you can.
Like LoJack, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, but I only have like 10 minutes left, so I'm going to move ahead here. But if many of you heard my inventory tracking lecture on big data, okay? And I disagree with Alex on what he's saying exactly. Meaning companies, the apps that they apply, the things that they do are basically economical driven. Is this worthwhile doing or not? And the frequency of collection of data depends on your needs there. But Alex is right. You cannot anticipate all your needs that you're going to have. And then in my example of inventory, what I finish up is say you tie this to purchases, you tie this to sales, you tie this to inventory carrying, you tie this to the other processes you have, literally. You tie it to utterances on the web by clients that will anticipate what you need to maintain. You need to so the expansion of potential applications is unforeseeable, which I agree with Alex, but is much more than that. It's all economically driven. You come up with an idea, that something will be useful for do. The incremental cost is low because you already have the RFIDs or the chips or the GPSs. I always put two little circles, RFID and GPS working together, okay? And this changed economics. And when the needs change, you are going to collect RFID data not once a day, but once a minute, once a second, maybe once a millisecond, despite of what Alex says here. Depends where you're going to make your money or where you're going to control. In cost, the cost of system development, improvement, overlay obey much different rules than the traditional fixed and variable cost manager model. Remember, this is the piggybacking thing. You use technology already exists and infrastructure. You develop infrastructure to measure inventory. From one second to the other, you are measuring sales. Many IT provision economics are charged in an incremental basis proposed to user. This is kind of the modern economic things that you don't buy facilities, you just use virtual machines and etc. Okay. Okay, this table actually compares what management and what auditing did, and this gives an example of what I was doing at AT&T. I don't have time for it, but I wanted to go to these things because we're going to argue about this. Information storage retrieval is being progressively automated. We agree with that, correct? The cost of creating a report that previously required incremental labor per report, now also, once established, costs nothing to repeat and typically developed by ERP developers. Okay, this is like, remember JP's dissertation? Okay, where he was talking about formalization standards and where he was saying the following. He said, you can talk about principles versus rule-based accounting until you turn pink. But when you look at who is implementing accounting rules, is computers, and computers don't do principles, correct? And so actually his example in his dissertation was leases, and he showed that there were 40 or 50 changes in the standard because the ERP makers started asking for details of how to implementing, and then they went to the emerging issues task force that had to clarify them. And so needed formalization, okay? And then the next thing is, once the rules are established on the ERPs, the cost of generating a new report is pretty much zero, correct? Yes or no?
After a report is designed, so after you design it, you can keep generating it close to zero reports. Now, designing a new report, even with all these relational databases.
But SAP is going to design it for you. If there is a requirement for people cost. Because in the old days, if the FASB came out and say you have to prepare a new type of report, you are committing 2 people to do the report every year, and et cetera, et cetera. Now these are done by the ERPs.
Well, I mean, look, in the past, you had this data processing department, right? So you have to submit your request. They would program it in COBOL. It takes 3 months. After it is finished, again, generating it usually is not easy. And again, look, I'm a computer scientist. I know that there are intractable computational problems. This unit, we can ignore the computational complexity, which in most cases. So we can assume that the cost is close to zero. So yes, those computers need to run.
Good, he agrees with me once.
No, but designing a report is still a non-trivial endeavor. So all that naive anticipation that, and regular Joe Blow will write SQL code didn't come to pass.
Unless he's Joe Farrar, that was a specialty and he worked with us for a year. But just one more, this aside, Alex will agree with this one will not disagree, is when now we get SAP reports from companies that they extract, their accountants don't know what the fields are. Okay, half of the things that we do at Itaú, okay, they say, oh, you have this field here, correct, June? And then that field, they don't know what the field is. And this is very common. It's because exactly this, the ERP guys designed this thing. They extract thousands of reports, but they don't understand what the fields are.
Like my example this morning, right?
Yes, exactly. So actually, when I talk to my students about job, I say the thing that accountants are going to do in the future is explain data, understand data to management, and do this kind of audit across many layers. Okay. With modern system, automatic data collection change the schema of data collection. Data from e-commerce GPS and it can be captured at 5 times. This is what we are discussing about the time intervals. Okay, cloud distribution storage created sends files that created ubiquitous access with more robust backups. Third-party sourcing creates several challenges on assurance, but some degree of professional competence. What I'm basically saying is that companies in general can trust better the cloud suppliers than they can trust their IT departments, because that's how they do. And if they don't do that very well, they'll be out of business. Okay.
If you are General Electric, you are probably going to trust your
That wasn't my experience at AT&T, but okay. Progressive Corporation, some forms of artificial intelligence to several business functions, creating more stochastic judgment based on decision rules. Okay, and who was it? Who worked with Glenn Gray and Chi on publishing the IJIS paper? You did, Pei? Yeah. What we were saying, Glenn was asking, where is artificial intelligence? Where are expert systems? And what we found is they are now not expert systems separately, they are built into software, correct? And it was an interesting question, and turns out that a lot of these arbitrary judgments are now formalized. And now this is the robot story, and there'll be accounting robots, but they are not going to be little things with wheels looking like people. They are going to be software doing functions for us. And one more comment is
They're not going to need those green eye shades?
no green eye shades, yes. No badges, and they are not going to, the robots are not going to get CPA certificates. Well, people are talking about drone auditors to count cows in a agricultural engagement. Yeah, they are talking about drones to monitor if you guys are not cheating in exams. You know? Well, Caltech was monitoring exams with drones flying in the classroom, and one drone fell in the head of a student, but the student didn't sue. Okay, and this is actually something that you might need to think a little bit, but it goes with my inventory example. The Internet of Things and wearables, which is kind of part of that, is going to create a lot of forms of audit evidence. Actually, you can extend your paper that's being published in Horizons thinking about these new forms of evidence. You know, Yoon's paper in the Horizons issue is all about including new big data evidence into audit evidence. And it's very interesting, but I wish Yoon had done much more examples and etc. And that's what you're doing in your chapter 3, correct? So that's where we are going with that. Hope. Okay, just kind of recapping, I have to finish. So this is actually, on the new audit, is really going to be something formalized around the standards and formalized applications. On the paper, I talk about 7 different things in the new modern audit. I don't have time to discuss them, but methods of analytic methods, how deep you're sure. This is something, at this moment, when you issue an opinion, everyone thinks the level of accuracy is materiality, whatever materiality is. And actually, eventually, I think the modern audit, you are going to buy an audit that is more precise and one that is less precise, depending what you want to do with it. And even if it's not going to be an audit, but it's going to be industrial assurance, you are going to have to specify how much effort is going to go in this, how accurate the thing is to be. How frequent, meaning from continuous to annual. Who is being assured, because now things are being broken down in little pieces. Is this something trying to give a response very rapidly or not? what kind of data you're going to use, what procedures you're going to use, and what assertions you're going to test. If you ask this to June, June is going to say, for each type of assertion, I'm going to test that is numerical, I'm going to write an app, and I'm going to sell it for a lot of money. You know that Caseware is selling apps at 150 bucks that they're charging?
Different apps have different costs, but like 100, 200.
See it?
Is anybody buying?
Yeah. Huh?
No, they're not.
They're not free. No, those are different. Those are not apps. Yeah, those are like it's more of a forum.
Right, yeah.
But ACL themselves, they sell packages.
Yeah, sales script, they have a huge community.
They sell scripts.
They sell the scripts
Yeah.
themselves as packages.
But you see, this is happening.
We get them, you know.
It might not happen the way we imagine it, but it's happening, meaning these things, there is an economics around this. Okay, I'm not going to talk about focus. All what I'm going to do is finish up because I'm running out of time. I want to read you this new definition. Oh, one thing, I do want to talk about Steve's slide here. Okay, this is and I was sick when Steve presented, and my colleagues attacked Steve and say, this is an ecosystem, what are the animals eating this and attacking the competitors? And that's not the type of ecosystem we are talking, but actually if you talk to Apple, you talk to Amazon, they talk about an ecosystem. What supplies, how do they do it, etc., 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 what are the threats? Now, let me just put the points here. Steve, if I am screwing this up, you correct me, okay? There are a whole set of things like population integrity, sleep transaction, manual entry, duplicate detection, all kind of types of things that you test with an app. Okay? And these things, in our view, are going to be running constantly on the data stream. And they are going to run particularly in the points of entry to check if the data that you're getting is reliable, and then the points of exit to see what you're feeding to the downstream systems is reliable and accurate. This, Denise, this is like we are doing the predictive audit in AICPA, okay? It's like checking if the data stream that's going to feed the outside suppliers are correct. But just doing these two things is not good enough for real assurance. You need to do analytic reviews, you need to do cross-sectional analysis, you need to do time series analysis that you can't do a moment of entry. So what we envisage is a set of routines always running and a set that are internal, checking for internal consistency, and a real-time process finding exceptional exceptions that are worth being examined. Correct, Hussein? Steve, what did I screw up here?
No, nothing.
Nothing? Okay. So let me move ahead here for a second. And he won't dare to say that, correct? Okay. This is actually Chi's. This is a pitch to Chi and to Trevor, because Chi and Trevor are talking about exploratory data analysis and auditing standards. And when we had a meeting with the Auditing Standards Board, we started talking about EDA, and I was surprised the reception was very good. Yeah. Except for a couple of people who had no idea what we were talking about. So that was good. So I finish up, because it's time to finish, correct? 59. Okay, so the new CA, good, that we don't have time to discuss this. A methodology that enables auditors to provide assurance on a subject matter for which an entity management is responsible using a continuous opinion schema. Continuous opinion schema. Paul, you could have written this, correct? Issued virtually simultaneous with or a short period of time after the occurrence of events underlying the subject matter. The continuous audit may entail predictive modules and may supplement organizational controls. The continuous audit environment will be progressively automated, with auditors taking progressively higher judgment functions. The audit will be analytic, by exception, adaptive, and cover financial and non-financial functions. So that's the definition we are trying to install. Correct, Paul? Huh?
Continuous assurance, yes. So what is A?
We ran out of time.
Because this is by definition, this is not auditing. This is much wider than auditing. So you're expanding.
We are laughing, Nancy and me, because that's what we got from Beth Schneider, correct?
Yeah, well, because that's what it is. I mean, will this happen by 2030?
The definition is
Yeah, but I mean, continuous auditing is not necessarily there to provide continuous assurance. Continuous auditing without providing continuous assurance.
I just
But you can't provide continuous assurance without doing continuous auditing.
I describe assurance as an umbrella of assurance services, one of which is the traditional audit. This is what Mike and me did in the Galileo effort.
If I am to offer any piece of advice here, in the middle, I would drop the part of the sentence which says and may supplement organizational controls. Because there are other things which are controversial here, but here you are really moving beyond what an audit or assurance is supposed to run.
Well, is this okay if you're talking about an organization internally? If you're not okay if you're talking about
Well, even internally, if something supplements organizational controls, it becomes a part of the control environment.
It's not supplementary.
Well,
So should I give a homework for everyone, every PhD student here to try to revamp this definition?
within the current framework, the internal audit department still has this dotted line of reporting to the board.
Hey guys, send me comments on this definition.
the audit committee. What are the rules? What's CA stand for?
Continuous assurance. Assurance, yeah. But we had this, not only we had the issue about continuous audit with assurance, we had the issue between continuous audit and continuous auditing, correct? And I tried to fix it, putting all the same, and it was incoherent, so I went back.
It
So-
all depends on what the meaning of is, right?
Yeah, the meaning of is it. Okay, guys, let's stop here. But if you can read this definition and send Nancy and me some comments and suggestions, including yours, Professor Kogan, we would very much appreciate. Correct? Huh? Oh, of course. Okay, and we are going to have the CALA meeting now. Okay? It's not here, it's upstairs. Oh, thank you. Hey, there is food upstairs, guys. Huh? 11th floor in the dean's beautiful meeting room.
Seriously, 1102?
Yeah.